Sinatra's 350-pound bodyguard attacked Bruce Lee backstage. Frank watched him get CR-used. Here is the full story.
Las Vegas, 1970. A city that never pretended to be clean, only controlled. Neon lights burned through the desert night. Casinos pulsed with money and tension. And behind every glamorous surface was an unspoken rule. Power mattered, and discretion kept people alive. On this particular Saturday night, the Sands Hotel was at the center of it all. Sold out, overflowing. Buzzing with anticipation weeks in advance, Frank Sinatra was performing. And in Vegas at that time, that meant more than music. It meant influence. The Sands wasn't just another venue for Sinatra. It was territory he knew intimately. He held ownership stakes, deep connections, and a reputation that extended far beyond the stage. When Sinatra performed in Las Vegas, the audience wasn't just fans. It was a cross-section of power. Celebrities, politicians, wealthy gamblers, men whose names never appeared in newspapers, and men whose names were never spoken at all. Everyone came for Frank, and everyone watched everything. Backstage reflected that reality. It wasn't chaotic or glamorous. It was controlled.
Access points monitored, corridors cleared, credentials checked repeatedly, security personnel positioned with intent, not decoration. This wasn't paranoia. It was standard procedure. Vegas in 1970 wasn't a playground. It was a pressure zone. Sinatra understood that fame attracted admiration, but it also attracted resentment, obsession, and threats that didn't announce themselves publicly.
At 54 years old, Sinatra was at the height of his Vegas authority. His voice commanded rooms. His presence commanded respect. But even power like his required protection. He had received threats before, some vague, some specific, some credible enough to tighten protocols. In that world, you didn't wait for something to happen before adjusting security. You anticipated.
That responsibility fell on the shoulders of the Sands head of security, a man known simply as Big Anthony. The nickname wasn't ironic. 6'6", 350 pounds, a former heavyweight boxer who had fought professionally in the 1950s. He wasn't a champion, but he had earned respect in the ring and even more outside of it.
After boxing, he moved into security work, Atlantic City first, then Las Vegas. By 1970, he had spent nearly a decade at the Sands. Anthony had seen everything. Drunken celebrities who didn't know when to stop. Gamblers who lost more than they could afford. Violent arguments that began over cards and ended with blood. Situations that never reached police reports because they were handled quietly and efficiently. His job wasn't to look tough. It was to end problems before they became disasters. Anthony believed in one core principle: presence, size, intimidation. The ability to physically dominate a situation if it came down to it. He didn't dismiss training or experience, but in his view, when real danger showed up, weight and strength decided outcomes. People thought twice when they saw him, and if they didn't, they learned quickly. That belief had never failed him. That night, Anthony stood near the wall backstage, scanning the environment the way he always did, calm, alert, unmoved. He had no reason to expect anything unusual. Sinatra was relaxed between shows, talking with Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. The Rat Pack atmosphere was familiar. Casual jokes, drinks in hand, a sense of ownership over the space. Then Bruce Lee arrived. He wasn't announced dramatically. He wasn't escorted like a celebrity. He came through the corridors quietly, checked by security, guided backstage with efficiency. Sinatra had invited him personally after a recommendation from someone within his Hollywood circle. Not for publicity, not for a photo opportunity, for a conversation. Bruce Lee in 1970 was known, but not yet mythologized the way history would later make him. He had recognition. He had respect among martial artists. He had film and television credits, but he wasn't yet the global icon frozen in legend. He was a working professional, deeply serious about combat, movement, and the realities of violence. Physically, he didn't command attention in that room. He was lean, compact, somewhere around 5'7", dressed simply. No visible arrogance, no theatrical energy.
To many eyes, especially eyes trained to evaluate threats through mass and muscle, he didn't look like someone who belonged in a discussion about protection. Anthony noticed him immediately. 30 years of experience trained his eyes to assess posture, build, potential. What he saw didn't impress him. In fact, it confirmed his assumptions. This was a small man in a big world.
Whatever skills he had, Anthony believed they wouldn't matter when real force entered the equation. Introductions were made. Sinatra stood and greeted Bruce politely. The handshake was brief. Sinatra gestured toward Dean and Sammy. Bruce acknowledged them respectfully. Dean raised his glass with casual curiosity. Sammy was more animated, intrigued by the idea of a martial artist backstage.
Sinatra didn't waste time with small talk. He never did when business was involved. He explained the situation plainly. Threats, risk, the need for protection that worked under pressure. Not theory, not performance, reality. He asked Bruce about his approach. Bruce listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. When he spoke, his tone was calm and professional. He explained that what he taught was practical, that real combat wasn't about strength alone, that timing, leverage, balance, and understanding the human body mattered more than brute force in many situations. Sinatra nodded, interested but reserved. Then he turned to Anthony. "What do you think?" he asked. Anthony didn't hesitate. He had strong opinions and no reason to hide them. "With respect," he said, "real security required presence, physical dominance. When dangerous people appeared, intimidation prevented escalation, and if it didn't, strength resolved it." He gestured subtly to his own size. 350 pounds wasn't theory, it was insurance. He looked at Bruce and stated what seemed obvious to him, that a man half his size couldn't protect someone like Sinatra from real threats. The atmosphere shifted. The room grew quieter. Dean leaned back, sensing something unfolding. Sammy stopped joking. Sinatra watched both men closely. He wasn't offended. He wasn't defensive. He was evaluating. He turned back to Bruce and asked for his response. Bruce didn't argue emotionally. He didn't challenge Anthony's experience. He acknowledged that size was a factor, but only one factor. He explained that speed, angles, structure, and understanding vulnerabilities could neutralize size when applied correctly. Silence followed. Anthony smiled slightly, confident, unmoved. He explained his position again. 20 years of experience, real confrontations. Physics mattered, weight mattered. If he grabbed Bruce, strength would decide the outcome. That wasn't arrogance, that was his lived reality. Sinatra listened. Then he made a decision. He asked Anthony to test Bruce's claims, not to hurt him, not to fight, just to evaluate. Anthony hesitated, not because he felt threatened, but because the size difference made the situation feel unnecessary. Sinatra insisted. Bruce agreed immediately. No hesitation, no bravado. They cleared a small space backstage. Jackets came off. Anthony removed his jacket, revealing a shoulder holster beneath. He handed it off, rolled his shoulders. Old habits from boxing resurfacing naturally. Bruce stood opposite him, calm, focused, still. The contrast was striking. A massive former heavyweight boxer facing a compact martial artist. The difference wasn't subtle. It was almost uncomfortable. 8 people watched. Sinatra, Dean, Sammy, several security staff, Sinatra's assistant. No crowd, no noise, just quiet attention. Anthony didn't take a traditional fighting stance. He didn't need to. His intention was simple. Close distance, grab, control. Use weight to end the demonstration quickly and prove his point. When he moved, he didn't hold back. He stepped forward aggressively, arms extending to seize Bruce. For someone his size, his movement was fast. Years of physical work had preserved his explosiveness. Bruce didn't retreat. He didn't circle. He stepped forward into the attack at an angle, his body shifting just enough to change the geometry of the encounter. Anthony's hands closed on empty space. Momentum carried his weight past the optimal position. In that fraction of a second, Bruce struck.
Not theatrically, not with flourish. A single, precise blow to the solar plexus, the nerve cluster beneath the sternum. Perfect placement. Perfect timing. Anthony's breath left his body instantly. The effect was immediate and uncontrollable. His diaphragm spasmed. His lungs refused to draw air. His hands dropped instinctively to his chest. His mouth opened, but nothing came in. Panic surged, not emotional panic, but physiological, the primal terror of suffocation. His knees buckled.
350 pounds dropped toward the floor, not collapsing violently, sinking. First one knee, then both. 11 seconds from the moment he initiated the attack to the moment he was on the ground, unable to breathe. Silence filled the space. Dean's glass froze midair. Sammy stared, stunned. The security staff didn't move. Sinatra stood still, eyes focused, absorbing every detail. No one spoke. After several long moments, Anthony's diaphragm released. Air rushed back in, harsh, painful gasps. His face flushed red. Embarrassment mixed with shock and physical distress. He inhaled again and again. Slowly, control returned. Bruce immediately extended his hand. Anthony took it. Bruce helped him to his feet. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction. Just professionalism. Anthony found his voice. He explained exactly what happened. The strike shut down his breathing. He couldn't defend. He couldn't respond. Sinatra stepped forward. "Are you okay?" he asked. Anthony nodded. He was shaken but honest. Sinatra turned to Bruce. His assessment was complete. He made the decision on the spot. Bruce would consult, train, advise. Dean finally broke the tension, shaking his head. Sammy exhaled, half laughing in disbelief. But before anything else could be said, Sinatra spoke again, quietly, with authority. What happened here, stayed here. No stories, no press, no damage to Anthony's reputation. He had protected Sinatra for years and would continue to do so. This was a private evaluation, nothing more. Everyone understood. This wasn't fear, it was code. The Rat Pack lived by it. Security depended on it. Vegas survived because of it. The show went on. Sinatra delivered a performance the audience would remember forever. Backstage, 8 people shared an experience they would never publicly discuss. In the weeks that followed, conversations continued. Training protocols were discussed. Consulting arrangements explored, but timing shifted. Bruce's career accelerated rapidly. Opportunities pulled him elsewhere. The relationship faded quietly, without drama or announcement. And the silence remained. Years passed, decades. Dean Martin never spoke of it. Sammy Davis Jr. never mentioned it. Anthony continued his work, retired, and passed away without telling the story. Sinatra took it to his grave. Others in the room honored the same discretion. Not because nothing happened, but because in that world, not everything was meant to be told. The moment wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about legend. It was about understanding, about recognizing that assumptions could fail, that strength without knowledge had limits. That precision could dismantle mass when applied correctly. 11 seconds rewrote expectations in a room full of professionals who thought they had seen everything. And then, the door closed. The story didn't circulate. It didn't become a headline. It didn't sell books or interviews. It stayed where it happened, backstage at the Sands, in a city built on secrets. That's why it doesn't exist the way modern stories do. No footage, no quotes, no dramatic retellings from the people involved. Just the absence of denial from those who lived long enough to know when silence mattered more than recognition. That night wasn't about proving martial arts superiority or embarrassing a security chief. It was about evaluating reality under pressure. And once that evaluation was complete, it was sealed. Vegas moved on. The lights stayed bright, and the truth stayed quiet.